My husband's business partner was like family, until I found their secret marriage certificate in his safe. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I believed in us. That's what makes this so bitter, not the betrayal itself, but the fact that I genuinely, wholeheartedly believed in the story we were building together. My name is Elena, and for 12 years, I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew his best friend. I thought I understood the architecture of my own life. I was wrong about all of it. When Marcus and I met, neither of us had anything but ambition and a shared apartment with thin walls and thinner prospects. He was working 60-hour weeks at a consulting firm, and I was finishing my MBA while teaching economics part-time at a community college. We ate ramen more nights than I care to remember, but we had plans. God, we had such plans. Marcus wanted to build something of his own. He'd seen too many brilliant ideas get buried in corporate bureaucracy, too many talented people ground down by systems that didn't value innovation. He wanted freedom, control, impact. And I wanted to help him get there. So I did. When he finally quit his job to start the company, I was the one who held us together. I took on extra teaching hours. I managed our finances down to the last penny. I built the first version of his business plan, ran the numbers until they made sense, and sat beside him at kitchen tables and coffee shops pitching to anyone who would listen. The company Cortex Solutions started in our living room. Just Marcus, his laptop, and an idea for streamlining supply chain logistics using predictive AI. It sounds simple now, but back then, in 2013, it was revolutionary enough to get attention. That's when Daniel came into our lives. We met him at a tech conference in Austin. Marcus had been invited to speak on a panel, and Daniel was in the audience. Sharp suit, sharper questions, the kind of person who commands a room without trying. After the panel, he approached Marcus at the hotel bar. I was there too, nursing a glass of wine and checking emails on my phone, but I remember the moment clearly. Daniel had this way of looking at you, like you were the only person in the world, like your ideas were the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. He told Marcus that his approach was brilliant, that he'd been looking for exactly this kind of innovation, and that he wanted in. Marcus was cautious at first. He'd had time wasters before, people who talked big and delivered nothing. But Daniel was different. He had capital, he had connections, and more than that, he had experience in exactly the areas where Marcus was: weak finance, legal structures, international markets. Within 3 months, Daniel became a partner in Cortex, 49% stake, substantial capital injection, and a network that opened doors we didn't even know existed. And I was happy about it. I truly was. The next few years were a blur of growth. Cortex went from a living room operation to a real office, then to a larger office, then to multiple offices. We hired employees. We landed major contracts. The technology Marcus had envisioned was changing how companies manage their supply chains, and the revenue started to match the promise. Daniel became part of our family during those years. Not just a business partner, but a genuine presence in our lives. He came to our house for dinners at least twice a week. He knew how our daughter Sophie liked her pancakes. He brought our son Jake comic books from his business trips. He spent Christmas with us 3 years in a row because, as he always said with that self-deprecating smile, he had no family of his own, and we were the closest thing to it. Marcus and Daniel had the kind of friendship that made me believe in male bonding. They finished each other's sentences. They had inside jokes that made them laugh until they couldn't breathe. They trusted each other with everything: business decisions, personal fears, dreams about the future. I trusted them both. I was part of the company too, though not officially. I had turned down the formal position Marcus offered me early on, choosing instead to focus on our children and to consult on strategy from the background. I reviewed financial reports. I sat in on major decisions. I knew the business inside and out, even if my name wasn't on the paperwork. Marcus always said I was his secret weapon. Daniel would joke that I was the brain behind the operation, that Marcus just had the charm. They made me feel valued, essential, part of the team. Looking back now, I wonder if that was intentional. If making me feel included was the best way to keep me from looking too closely. By 2020, Cortec was valued at $40 million. We had offices in 3 countries. We were in talks with a major acquisition target. Marcus and Daniel were talking about taking the company public within 2 years. Our life had transformed. We moved into a house with a pool and a view. We took vacations to places I'd only dreamed about as a girl eating ramen in that thin-walled apartment. Sophie was in private school. Jake had a tutor for his dyslexia. I had everything I thought I wanted. Except, as it turned out, I had nothing at all. The day everything changed started ordinarily enough. It was a Tuesday in March, one of those gray spring days where the weather can't decide what it wants to be. I had dropped the kids at school and was heading to a yoga class when Marcus called. He sounded stressed. There was a meeting with potential investors that had been moved up to that afternoon, and he needed a specific folder of documents from his office. He was already at the restaurant with Daniel, schmoozing the investors, and couldn't leave. Could I possibly run by the office and grab it? Of course I could. I had keys. I knew the security codes. I'd been to that office 1,000 times. The building was quiet when I arrived. Most of the staff worked remotely on Tuesdays. I used my key card, took the elevator to the top floor, and walked into the executive suite. Marcus's office was its usual organized chaos. Papers everywhere, 3 monitors glowing with open spreadsheets, a half-drunk cup of coffee growing cold. I found the folder he needed easily enough, but as I was leaving, I noticed something odd. Daniel's office door was open. It was never open when he wasn't there. Daniel was meticulous about security, always locking his door, always protecting his space. I should have just left. I should have grabbed Marcus's folder and walked away. But something made me pause. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe deciding it was time for me to know the truth. I walked into Daniel's office. It was immaculate, as always. Minimalist desk, expensive art on the walls, a leather chair that probably cost more than my first car. But on his desk, there was a notebook lying open. The kind of leather-bound notebook Daniel used for important notes, the kind he always carried with him, except he hadn't carried it that day. He'd left it behind. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I did. The page it was open to had a list of dates and amounts, large amounts, transfers, withdrawals, movements of money that I didn't recognize from any reports I'd seen. And at the bottom of the page, written in Daniel's precise handwriting, was a phrase that made my blood cold. Phase 3 complete. Malta account secured. Marriage certificate filed. Marriage certificate. I stared at those words for a full minute, trying to make them mean something other than what they obviously meant. Maybe it was about someone else. Maybe it was a note about a client. Maybe I was reading it wrong, but I wasn't wrong. My hands were shaking as I looked around Daniel's office, suddenly seeing it differently. The locked cabinet behind his desk. The safe I'd never paid attention to before, built into the wall behind a painting. The painting was slightly askew. I don't know what possessed me. Desperation, maybe. Or the sudden, horrible certainty that I was standing in the middle of something very wrong. I walked over and moved the painting aside. The safe was there, and it wasn't properly closed. The door was pushed shut but not locked, as if Daniel had closed it in a hurry. I pulled it open. Inside were folders, legal documents, passports, and right on top, in a clear plastic sleeve, was a marriage certificate from Malta, dated 18 months earlier. The names on it were Marcus Castellan and David Romero. I didn't recognize the names at first, but then I saw the attached photographs. My husband and Daniel. The pictures were clearly them, just slightly altered. Marcus with darker hair, Daniel with glasses he didn't normally wear. Different enough to pass casual scrutiny, but unmistakably them. They were married. My husband had married his business partner in a foreign country under fake names. I stood there in that office, holding that certificate, and felt the entire architecture of my life collapse around me. I didn't confront them. That might surprise you, but I didn't. Because even in that moment of absolute shock, even as my hands trembled and my vision blurred, some part of my brain stayed cold and analytical. This wasn't about love. This wasn't a secret romance. I knew Marcus. I knew his sexuality, his desires, his complete lack of romantic interest in men. This was something else. This was about money. I photographed everything in that safe, every document, every page. I used my phone and took hundreds of pictures, making sure I captured every detail. Then, I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the safe, straightened the painting, and left Daniel's office. I delivered the folder to Marcus at the restaurant. I smiled at the investors. I kissed my husband's cheek and told him I'd see him at home. I drove back to our house with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind racing through possibilities. At home, I locked myself in the study and started researching. Malta. Why Malta? It took me about 20 minutes to understand. Malta allows same-sex marriages, which many countries do. But Malta also has specific laws about marital property and asset protection. Under Maltese law, spouses can claim shared ownership of assets acquired during the marriage. They can shield assets from certain types of claims, and perhaps most importantly, they can transfer assets between spouses with significant tax advantages and legal protections. I started going through our financial records, everything I could access from home, every document I'd been copied on, every report I'd reviewed over the years. At first glance, everything looked normal, but now I was looking with different eyes. Now I was looking for patterns, and I found them. Over the past 18 months, since that marriage certificate was dated, there had been a slow, methodical restructuring of Cortex assets. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise red flags, but a steady stream of transfers, reorganizations, and reallocations. Money moving into offshore accounts, intellectual property being transferred to subsidiary companies, assets being revalued and redistributed. And all of it structured in a way that slowly, gradually reduced what would be considered marital assets in my marriage to Marcus, while increasing what would be considered marital assets in his Maltese marriage to Daniel. They were divorcing me financially without actually divorcing me. If I had filed for divorce on that day, I would have been entitled to half of Marcus's share of Cortec, half of 51%. That should have been worth about $20 million. But the way they'd restructured things, I would have been entitled to half of almost nothing. The real assets were in structures that I had no claim to, structures that Marcus shared not with me, but with his legal spouse, David Romero, who was, of course, Daniel. I sat in that study until 3 a.m, building a timeline. Every transfer, every restructuring, every suspicious movement of money. I built spreadsheets. I cross-referenced dates. I dug through every piece of financial data I could access. By dawn, I understood the full scope of what they'd done, and I started planning what I was going to do about it. The hardest part wasn't the investigation. The hardest part was pretending. I had to wake up every morning and kiss my husband goodbye. I had to smile at Daniel when he came for dinner. I had to listen to them talk about the future of the company, about the acquisition talks, about their plans. Our plans, they always said, our future. I played my role perfectly, the supportive wife, the trusted friend, the woman who believed in them. But every moment, I was working. I hired a lawyer in London, paying cash from an inheritance account Marcus didn't know about. I couldn't risk anyone local. I couldn't risk word getting back to them. My lawyer was a woman named Patricia Rothstein, a specialist in international financial fraud and asset recovery. She was expensive, brilliant, and completely discreet. When I sent her the photographs from Daniel's safe and my analysis of the financial movements, She called me within an hour. "This is sophisticated," she said, her British accent crisp over the phone. "Whoever planned this understood international law very well." "Can we stop it?" I asked. "More than that," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We can reverse it, but we need to move carefully, and we need evidence that will stand up in court." Over the next 6 weeks, Patricia and I built a case. She had investigators track down the real identities behind the Maltese marriage. She subpoenaed banking records through international legal channels. She found the paper trail of the fake identities Marcus and Daniel had purchased. And I kept playing my role at home. I found other things too, once I knew where to look. A second set of books that Daniel kept in a locked drawer in his home office. I found them during a dinner party at his house, slipping away to use the bathroom, and instead picking the lock on his study. Inside were projections, plans, a timeline for what they called the final phase. They were planning to finalize a major acquisition within 3 months. Cortec would merge with a European competitor, creating a new entity valued at over $100 million. In the restructuring, Marcus and David Romero would control 70% of the new company, and I would be left with nothing. The acquisition meeting was scheduled for May 15th. They had everything in place: the lawyers, the contracts, the offshore accounts ready to receive the funds. They were so close to pulling it off. I let them think everything was going according to plan. I even helped them, in a way. When Marcus asked me to review the acquisition contracts, I did. I made helpful suggestions. I found small errors and corrected them. I was the perfect supportive wife right until the end. Patricia and I timed our move for the morning of the acquisition meeting. We couldn't wait until after once the deal was signed. It would be exponentially harder to unravel. We had to strike while everything was still in motion. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at the offices of the acquiring company in Manhattan. Marcus and Daniel flew out the night before. I told Marcus I'd follow the next morning, that I had a parent-teacher conference I couldn't miss. He kissed me goodbye at the airport, told me he loved me, told me that after this deal closed, our lives would change forever. He had no idea how right he was. I didn't go to any parent-teacher conference. Instead, I got on a plane to New York with Patricia and a team of lawyers. We had a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Manhattan District Attorney's office. We brought everything: the marriage certificate, the financial records, the fake identities, the evidence of systematic asset stripping, the paper trail showing how they'd used an international marriage to commit fraud. The prosecutor we met with was a man named James Chen, and he specialized in white-collar crime. When he finished reviewing our evidence, he looked up with something like admiration. "This is one of the most elaborate schemes I've seen," he said. "And you documented all of it?" "All of it," I confirmed. "We can stop the acquisition," he said. "We can freeze their assets. We can file charges. But Mrs. Castellan, you understand that this will destroy the company. Everything your husband built will be tainted by this." "I understand," I said. "But it was never really his, was it? Not the way he built it. Not with my money, my work, my trust." Chen nodded slowly. "When do you want us to move?" "They're signing papers at 10. I want you to move at 9:55. I went to the acquisition meeting. Not to the conference room where Marcus and Daniel were signing their fraudulent deal, but to the building's lobby, where I waited with Patricia and 2 police detectives. At 9:55, we went upstairs. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect. Mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, a dozen lawyers and executives in expensive suits, and at the center of it all, Marcus and Daniel, pens in hand, about to sign the contracts that would make them rich and leave me with nothing. I opened the door and walked in. The look on Marcus's face was something I'll remember forever. Confusion first, then recognition, then the slow creeping horror as he saw Patricia behind me, and then the detectives. "Elena?" he said. "What are you—" "Marcus Castellan?" the detective interrupted. "David Romero?" Daniel went white. not pale white, like all the blood had drained from his body. "I don't," Marcus started. "Those are your legal names in Malta, correct?" the detective continued. "The names you used to get married 18 months ago? The names on the accounts you've been using to strip assets from Cortex Solutions?" The room had gone completely silent. The lawyers were frozen. The executives looked confused. The acquiring company's CEO stood up slowly, looking between Marcus and the detectives. "What is this?" the CEO demanded. "This," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife, "is fraud. International financial fraud using a fictitious marriage to shield assets from legitimate claims. We're shutting this down." She placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of everything: the marriage certificate, the financial transfers, the fake identities, all of it. "The acquisition is void," she continued. "As of this moment, all assets of Cortex Solutions are frozen pending investigation. Mr. Castellan and Mr. Romero are under investigation for fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion across multiple jurisdictions." I watched Marcus's face as he understood what was happening. Watched him look at me with something between betrayal and disbelief. "Elena," he said quietly, "you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, and my voice was steady, cold. "I understand that you married your business partner under fake names to steal from me. I understand that you've spent 18 months restructuring our company to cut me out. I understand that you were planning to walk away with everything while leaving me with nothing." "It wasn't like that," Daniel said, finally finding his voice. "It was just business, a legal strategy to protect the company." "By committing fraud?" Patricia interrupted. "By creating false identities? By using an international marriage to shield assets while Mr. Castellan remained married to his actual wife?" "We can explain," Marcus said desperately. He looked at the CEO. "This is a misunderstanding. We can—" "The acquisition is canceled," the CEO said flatly. "Obviously." He looked at his lawyers. "Get us out of this. Now." The room erupted in chaos. Lawyers shouting, executives demanding explanations. And in the center of it all, Marcus and Daniel, watching their carefully constructed plan collapse around them. I turned to leave, but Marcus grabbed my arm. "Elena, please," he said, and there were actual tears in his eyes. "Let me explain. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. It was just supposed to protect the business. If we ever got divorced, I didn't want you to take half. So you found a way to make sure I'd get nothing," I finished. "I know, Marcus. I know everything." "We can fix this," he said desperately. "We can make this right. The kids think about Sophie and Jake." "I am thinking about them," I said. "I'm thinking about how I don't want them to grow up believing that the man who betrays their mother deserves their respect." I pulled my arm free and walked out of that conference room with my head high. Behind me, I heard Daniel say, "We need lawyers, right now." But it was already too late for lawyers. The next 3 months were brutal. The investigation expanded. Federal prosecutors got involved. The story leaked to the press, and suddenly our private disaster was public entertainment. The headlines were vicious. Tech CEO's secret gay marriage was actually elaborate fraud scheme. Wife uncovers husband's fake international marriage to business partner. How 2 men pretended to be married to steal millions. Marcus and Daniel hired the best lawyers money could buy. They argued that the marriage was a legitimate business arrangement, that they hadn't technically broken any laws, that it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fake identities alone were serious crimes. The systematic asset stripping was textbook fraud, and the tax evasion across multiple jurisdictions meant they were facing charges in several countries. In the end, they took a plea deal. Marcus got 18 months in federal prison. Daniel got 2 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution, fines, and back taxes that amounted to everything they'd tried to hide. Cortex Solutions was dismantled in the restructuring. The legitimate assets were valued. the debts paid, and what remained was divided according to the law. My half of Marcus's legitimate stake came to $16 million. Not the 20 I might have gotten if they hadn't started their scheme, but far more than the nothing they'd planned to leave me with. Marcus's half went mostly to paying his legal fees, his fines, and his restitution. He came out of the whole thing with less than $1 million and a felony record. Daniel lost even more. His reputation in the business world was destroyed. His assets were seized. He declared bankruptcy. They tried to blame me at first. Marcus gave an interview from prison where he said I'd overreacted, that I'd destroyed a successful company out of spite, that I'd ruined him over a business arrangement I didn't understand. But the public wasn't sympathetic. The evidence was too clear. The betrayal was too obvious, and I think people understood what I'd really been fighting for. Not just money, but dignity, recognition, the refusal to be erased. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the criminal cases concluded. It was messy and bitter, but in the end, I got what I was entitled to. The house, the liquid assets, primary custody of Sophie and Jake. Marcus got supervised visitation and a legal obligation to pay child support he could barely afford. The kids struggled with it all, of course. Sophie was 13 and old enough to understand that her father had done something wrong, but young enough to still want to believe in him. Jake was only 9 and mostly just confused about why Daddy was in prison and why Uncle Daniel didn't come around anymore. I got them into therapy. I got myself into therapy. We learned how to talk about it, how to process it, how to separate the man they'd loved from the man who'd betrayed us all. It took time. It's still taking time. As for me, I went back to teaching. I took a position at the state university teaching business ethics. There's a certain irony in that, I suppose, but it feels right. I spend my days teaching young people about integrity, about fiduciary responsibility, about the importance of transparency in business relationships. I tell them stories about companies that succeeded through honest dealing and companies that collapsed under the weight of their own deceptions. I don't tell them my story. That would be too raw, too personal. But I think they can sense it in the way I teach, in the passion I bring to discussions of corporate fraud and betrayal. I also started consulting with lawyers who handle complex divorce cases, particularly ones involving hidden assets and business interests. I help them understand how people hide money, how to spot the patterns, how to protect their clients from being erased. I'm good at it. Turns out, once you've been betrayed at that level, you develop an instinct for finding the truth hidden inside lies. People ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd handled it differently, maybe confronted Marcus privately, maybe worked out some kind of settlement that didn't involve prosecutors and prison time. The answer is no. Not for a second. Because this was never just about the money. It was about the fact that the two people I trusted most in the world had looked at me and decided I was disposable. They decided that my 12 years of support, my sacrifices, my work, none of it mattered enough to deserve honesty. They decided to erase me, and I decided to erase them instead. Marcus gets out of prison next year. I don't know what he'll do with himself. His reputation is destroyed. He'll never work in tech again. His own family barely speaks to him. Daniel is already out. He moved to another state, changed his name, ironically, legally this time, and from what I hear, he's working as a consultant for small businesses. A far cry from the corner office and the international deals. I don't hate them anymore. Hatred is exhausting, and I've spent enough energy on them already. Mostly I feel nothing when I think about them. They're like characters in a story I once read, people who made bad choices and faced the consequences. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment in Daniel's office. The moment I opened that safe and saw the marriage certificate. The moment my entire world realigned. And I think about what would have happened if I hadn't looked. If I'd just taken Marcus's folder and left. If I'd never known. They would have gotten away with it. They would have completed the acquisition, restructured everything, and eventually divorced me with nothing to show for 12 years of partnership. I would have been the woman who helped build an empire and ended up with an empty house and a monthly alimony check. Instead, I'm the woman who burned it all down rather than let them steal it. Was it worth it? Was destroying the company worth the revenge? Here's the thing people don't understand. I didn't destroy the company for revenge. I destroyed it for truth, for accountability, for the principle that you can't build something great on a foundation of lies and betrayal and expect it to stand. Cortec was already destroyed the moment Marcus and Daniel decided to become Marcus and David. They just didn't know it yet. I was just the one who finally told the truth. It's been 3 years now since that day in the conference room. Sophie is 16 and already talking about college. Jake is 12 and thriving in middle school despite everything. They have a relationship with their father, though it's complicated and probably always will be. I'm in a good place. I have my work. I have my kids. I have a life that's entirely my own, built on foundations I chose and trust. Sometimes people recognize me. The story made enough news that my face was out there for a while. Usually they just stare a little, trying to place me. Occasionally, someone will approach, will tell me they admire what I did, that they wish they'd had my courage when they were betrayed. I tell them the same thing every time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more than the fear. For me, what mattered more was refusing to be erased. I built something with Marcus. I believed in us. I invested everything, my time, my money, my trust, my love, into our shared future. When he decided to steal that future from me, when he and Daniel decided I was nothing more than an obstacle to be removed, they made a choice. And then I made mine. I chose to fight. I chose to investigate. I chose to plan. I chose to wait for the perfect moment and strike with everything I had. I chose to be the author of my own story instead of a footnote in theirs. And when I walked out of that conference room, leaving behind the wreckage of their plans and the ashes of their careers, I wasn't walking away from my life. I was walking toward it, toward a life where I decide who I trust and who I let into my world, where I control my own assets and make my own choices, where my children see that their mother is strong and smart and unwilling to be victimized. Marcus and Daniel thought they were the smart ones. They thought their elaborate scheme was too clever for me to understand, too complex for me to untangle. They thought I was just the supportive wife, the woman in the background, the one who didn't need to be consulted about the important decisions. They were wrong about all of it. I was always the smart one. I was always the one who understood the numbers, who saw the patterns, who could build the strategy. They just made the mistake of underestimating me. It was the last mistake they made together. 3 years later, a journalist asked me, "If you could go back to that day in the office, when you found the marriage certificate, what would you do differently?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Nothing," I said. I would do exactly the same thing, because the truth might be painful, but lies are poison. And I'd rather live in painful truth than comfortable lies. She asked, "Do you think they ever really understood why you destroyed everything instead of just taking a settlement?" I smiled. I don't think they ever understood me at all. That was their first mistake. And by the time they realized it, it was far too late. Her final question: any advice for women who suspect their partners are hiding something? I thought about that for a long moment. Trust your instincts, I finally said. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And once you know the truth, don't let anyone convince you that being deceived was somehow your fault. You didn't cause the betrayal by discovering it. You simply refused to live in the lie. And then? She asked. And then you decide what kind of person you want to be. The kind who accepts betrayal for the sake of convenience, or the kind who demands better. I stood up to leave, but I had one more thing to say. I chose to demand better, and I've never regretted it for a second. That's my story. That's how I discovered that my husband had married his business partner under false names to steal everything from me. And that's how I made sure they lost everything instead. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have been more forgiving, more understanding, more willing to accept that it was just business. But here's what I learned. When someone you love betrays you, especially in a calculated, systematic way, forgiveness isn't always the answer. Sometimes the answer is justice. Sometimes the answer is consequences. Sometimes the answer is ensuring they can never do to someone else what they did to you. I sleep well at night. My conscience is clear. My children are healthy and happy. My career is fulfilling. My bank account is my own. And somewhere out there, two men who thought they were clever enough to steal from me are living with the consequences of underestimating the woman they betrayed. I call that justice. I call that truth. And I call it a happy ending, not because everything worked out perfectly, but because I'm the one who got to write it.